The Supreme Court of India has mandated the forming of a National Task Force or NTF that will now ensure that safety at workplace is ensured for all resident doctors. The Supreme Court has also made some important observations of the rape and murder case of a 31-year-old resident doctor in RG Kaur Medical College in Kolkata, and after that also given out a list of directives on what has to be immediately implemented. So first, let's talk about the questions raised. These are the important questions that the top court has observed. First, why was the identity of the girl leaked? Now remember, some prominent citizens of Kolkata have been summoned, including 2 doctors, for making irresponsible statements, for so-called revealing information that was not supposed to be in public domain. Those summons are being issued by Kolkata police, but the Supreme Court has observed that this sort of leaking of confidential, sensitive information could have been prevented. Why was the identity leaked is one of the questions that the top court asked. Secondly, why were the parents told by the department where she worked that their daughter has committed suicide? Who is behind this? Who was trying to cover up? The third question that the top court raised is that why wasn't the crime scene sealed immediately? Why were vandals allowed to enter? Remember, there were close to 7,000 people that entered and vandalized the emergency room and the department where the deceased doctor worked. Also, why no action against the ex-principal? Because practically he was given sort of a safe passage, a dignified exit, as it were, from his role as the principal of RG Medical College to another college where he was appointed by the state government. The top court raises this question that since this happened under his watch, why is he being allowed to get away with it? And then, of course, questions around the delay in FIR. Why the delay after the body was handed over at 8:30 p.m.? Why did the FIR take 4 more hours to be filed? So these are the questions raised, but the important part of the entire hearing today in the Supreme Court, were the suggestions that came. At least 10 important directives have come from the top court. I'm going to take you through all of them. First one is install CCTV cameras. Now, when you go through this, you will notice that all of these protective and safety measures were missing in this government hospital. And it is not just one government hospital that we are talking about here. In most Sarkari hospitals across the country, it's the same story. So there were no safety measures. For instance, CCTV camera. Now the top court says install CCTV cameras at all entry and exit points. Ensure adequate lighting in all places. Imagine there are dark, dingy rooms which are obviously unsafe areas, especially for women doctors who work in sort of night hours or have to do night duty. For them, it's particularly dangerous if all the spaces where they have to operate are not well lit. Separate resting rooms from male and female doctors. Again, it has now come to notice that these doctors who are expected to do a round-the-clock job, who are on 36-hour shifts, do not have a dedicated resting space. If the deceased doctor indeed had a space where she could rest, this incident would not have happened. So the top court is very clear that resting rooms for male and female doctors, separate resting rooms, are now mandated by the top court. All government hospitals will have to follow these directives to ensure safe workspaces, and the NTF, the National Task Force, is mandated to ensure that this is implemented. Provide transport facility between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. In private offices, it is there. For instance, the organization where I worked, all women employees had access to office transport after a certain hour, because as journalists, we also worked odd hours and graveyard shifts and all of that. But in government organizations, women who work in medical colleges and hospitals apparently did not have this facility. So now the top court says, please give them transport facility between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Restricted entry to resting rooms. So these resting rooms will be very exclusive and private, with access given only to the resident doctors and no one else. Again, in private offices, at least where I have worked, we used to have something called the access card. And that access card worked in certain areas depending on where it is, which parts of the office is activated for you. So not everybody, for instance, could access the changing room where news anchors would go to change their outfits. We use that access card to enter that room, so any other employee does not have access. So if these sort of things, which have been there for long now, at least in the private sector, should be implemented in government offices and in workplaces, that is what the Supreme Court has prescribed. Resting rooms should be well ventilated. Do not allot the worst kind of a go down or a storage room and call it a resting room for doctors. There must be clean, airy spaces for doctors to rest. Ban on entry of intoxicated people. This was supposed to be a given. I mean, why would you allow people who are under the influence of alcohol to walk into a hospital? They naturally become a menace, a threat to those who are admitted in the hospital or the doctors who are operating there. So a complete ban on entry of intoxicated people. So some measures would be in place to check breath analyzers or some sort of a mechanism to ensure that intoxicated or people under the influence of alcohol do not enter hospital premises. Separate resting or duty rooms for every department. Again, every department should have a dedicated space for doctors, not just for resting in terms of taking a nap, but for the gaps that they have between the duty hours to simply have a time, have a cup of coffee. So those sort of resting places are also now mandated for every department. Drinking water facility in the resting room. I am in fact surprised that all these facilities were not there. The basic, very basic facilities that any workplace should have, it has been noticed, were missing, which is why the Supreme Court had to now intervene and talk about providing these sort of basic facilities for the doctors where they can operate, where they can rest, and they can also deliver their duties without having to suffer through the abysmally poor sort of environment, work environment that they are forced into. So the Supreme Court has taken note of all of these things. And lastly, well-trained security guards to be deployed. One of the issues here is the checks and balances when it comes to employing volunteers, for instance, were not in place. How would you have someone like the rapist in this case employed without a good check of his background credentials? He has a record of domestic violence. None of that obviously came to the notice, and he was operating as a civic volunteer. This is a position that was apparently created by the Mamata Banerjee government, that you will have these volunteers work with the police to ensure smooth functioning of the admission process in government hospitals. But clearly, you also have to have some checks and balances in place to ensure that people with dubious backgrounds or criminal records do not get appointed for these sort of positions. So largely, that is what the top court has said today. And if we can have these sort of institutional safety standards installed, a lot of these crimes can be eliminated. This is the least we should do and we must do. In fact, it is appalling that we do not have these safety standards in place, and it is only now that the entire country has got a wake-up call that these workspaces have always been unsafe. It was almost like a recipe for these sort of crimes to happen when you do not have these safety standards in place. So let's hope that from here on the NTF will get cracking, and government hospitals where women doctors are working around the clock will have better and safe workspaces.